All right, so we pulled this down from the cloud, and now we're ready to start looking at it and working on it. And we can see, even though this is the same, so our management side of the project doesn't change, we do have a different template. We have a plan, do, check, act. So this workflow can be different. And that's the cool thing, is I always tell folks, this is very flexible, so you can crawl, walk, run to be able to get whatever size project you need to get done. I do want to point something out. So we have, this is a relatively simple project, and you can see we have some savings, and there's different elements in here. Now, there's two different ways for folks to put their financial information in that can help identify return on investment. This is what I would kind of think of as an open format. So basically, anybody that's been assigned access to this project, these can be changed. Okay. One of the things that I hear from organizations that has been a problem in the past, and maybe creates that roller coaster, starts that downward spiral, is that management doesn't trust the numbers. And the weird thing is, what I find is engineers tend to really be very focused on what they're looking at, their process, their area. And there are times when, yes, they're very accurate in the numbers on the particular project they're dealing with, whatever process that is. But sometimes they're not privy to how that affects the rest of the organization. Because if you have inefficiency in one part of the organization, that often affects other parts of the organization, because maybe planning is not as good, incoming materials or incoming services and efforts can't be as stable as we would like them to be. So what we can do with this is we now have managed data. If you have sensitive information, and financial is probably one of the number one, maybe KPIs could be another, and you want it to be linked to that true source of truth. Maybe it's an account financial manager or a controller, and they have some data. Now we have managed data where this can come in as a managed data source, and the only authority that has anything to do with it is a role of data manager. And really all they're doing is identifying where are we connecting to get that data in. So that adds a really huge element when you're talking about trying to justify projects and get support from the upper echelons of an organization. We also have, in this particular case, if you're not familiar with the Plan, Do, Check, Act, we just kind of reiterate with people, what kind of happens in the plan area, what happens in the do, what happens in the act, what happens in the check. And you can see that tends to be kind of a cycle. And we have the instructions on, this one's a relatively simple one. We want to improve on-time delivery. Why? We want to ensure goods and services are completed. And we want, we're measuring that elapsed time from order to fulfillment. We have a relatively simple process. Here we have an area to be able to capture that in a process flow. We get an order. We get some evaluation and confirmation. Now it goes into a formalized order. Something is made, whether it's goods or services. Then we check it to make sure that is correct, and then it gets to the customer. So this is a very easy flow to follow. But now maybe we're going to get together in a room, and we want to decide, what are those factors that affect this poor on-time delivery. So the nice thing is we have this set up in a Brainstorm. We can set it up in different ways. So if we wanted to change it, this one's completed, but I have different ways that I can set this up. I can have different types, but I have distribution as one. And what comes into that? Poor communication, bad shipping, orders. So I have processing time, incomplete orders, inspections, in manufacturing. So we can really kind of plot out what's going on. And the nice thing about that is if I right click on any of these things that I'm doing, any of these tools, I have the ability to send that as a Word document or create a skeletal PowerPoint. So we understand, this is a great tool to have because it's online. You don't have to worry about paper, but sometimes in a reporting perspective, people are going to bring this into a meeting. Maybe they don't want to open up the whole thing. They want to just show highlights. There's some flexibility to be able to do that either in a Word document or a PowerPoint. Now, once we've brainstormed, now we're going to come up with assigning responsibility. So here we have 4 or 5 people that are involved. And then we're going to have an idea. Now, if I wanted to know what was going on, so R's are responsible to complete activities. A, supporting and defend. C, consultation authority. And then I is to inform. So we have that ability to plug that in and identify, what are these different people doing in the context of making this project happen. Now we get into the do area. And this is a very simple project, but it's impactful. You can see that 34% of the time I'm not meeting my goals. And, what I find in a lot of these, we don't have to have the most complex statistics. I don't have to do a full-blown model. I don't have to do a simulation. Sometimes it's just a matter of just taking the time to break down this project, identifying where we're at. We can see 34% of the time we're late, and where do we want to go? So in this particular case, they're looking at maybe a new partner that's involved in deliveries, and they think that some of that data on testing that new partner, it looks like they're going to make a significant improvement. Now, here's what I really love. Remember I said we would get in those rooms and we would have to defend and define, what's going on with a project and try to very quickly get up to speed because we had to report to maybe an auditor or we had to report to a regulatory authority. And one of the breaks that we would have often was either we would have some analysis that there was no context. It was just numbers, plots, and graphs. And we had to try to piece together, why did we do the analysis? What was it doing? What was the meaning there? Because I'm a statistician. And I will tell you, I'm not the best at keeping notes on what I'm doing. So I'm just as guilty as anybody else. But think of it this way. Here I've got a lot of context that gives me a perspective on, what was the process of this problem. But now when I double click on this, we actually have a Minitab file that is embedded in this project. And so what we're able to do is collect data on, where we were currently and that new transportation provider. So here's where that information came from that went into our project. But now what we want to do is say, hey, I know that I'm seeing sample-wise 34% against 19%, but I want to be I want to be very sure. I want to have some gravity behind that. So I'm going to apply some statistics and run a 2-sample test for proportions. And bottom line, what I can see is, what can I expect from a difference with that new partner? And often, yes, it's highly significant, but I think sometimes this is more informative. So as long as these are both negative, in other words, my new partner has a better, actually less late shipments than my current, it's anywhere between 0.8 and 22. So between 8 and 22% less than where I'm at now. So this kind of tells me the rubber hits the road. Yes, they are definitely better. Maybe they're not perfect, but I can make some ground. Now, do I have enough data to be able to make this conclusion? And that's where we can run the power and sample size so I can see, when I'm comparing, where am I at in power and sample size? Now, going back to the project, that information has been brought in here. So I have that information. I can see where I'm at. And not to get too much into the weeds, but bottom line, what power is telling you is that how likely is this difference going to be captured out in the real world? So you can put these power and sample size statistics to really kind of validate that, that analysis that I did I have enough data to make the conclusions, or maybe do I need to add a little bit? And then in the act, we can put some solutions in place and maybe have a plan of how we're going to put this together. One thing I do want to show you is that in any of these areas, now a lot of this information we put in there in the solution kind of by default because they're very common. But think about it this way. What if I already have a bunch of projects? I don't want to redo this information. Or maybe I have some outside information. Maybe I have an Excel sheet that's relevant for the body of this project. I'm just right-clicking here, but I can actually bring in any related document. I just need to know where it's at. Now, once you bring it in, it is now stored in the engaged solution. So what I always suggest to my customers is you need to think procedurally how you want to deal with that. Now, if you save a copy, now you have two sources of truth. You can create that link to the external file, so I'm always bringing that document in from where the source is. Or lastly, what I could do is bring that copy in and then delete that source file so all of my documents are in one spot. So, it does allow for some flexibility, but I always suggest make sure that we think about that from a procedural standpoint. Make sure that we don't have different versions of the same document in two different places. All right. So we're going to come back here. Now, I showed you this area. This is kind of your highlight of your dashboard. You can see where you're at. And by the way, you can also see where you're at from a task perspective, not just projects. So you can search and see where people have tasks. But the workflow is really what makes this a gem. And the nice thing is anybody who is in this, if you can think of your whole continuous improvement effort, one of the things that I hear that comes from these status meetings is, oh, well, we're late on this project. Why? I'm not sure. Give me a week. I have to track it down and find out, where are we missing information, who's responsible for it, and how do we deal with that? In the workflow, there are notifications in here. So I left a large list so you could kind of see. So I have access to everything. So assume I'm kind of like a management level. I can see all over. But I can see where did I have milestones approved and when. I can see when did I have new ideas come into the system, because there's a full idea workflow. Very importantly, I can see when there are phases of a project that are getting close to being overdue, and you can configure what that is, how many days you would consider is kind of that warning zone. And then also can get warnings of, oh, you do have a phase that's overdue. And if I click on this, I can go right to the project. And let's say my financial details are overdue. And maybe Christine Smith is in charge of the financial details. Well, instead of going into a meeting and trying to dig all that out, I can just go down to that person's office, give her a call, do a Teams meeting and say, hey, what's up? They say, hey, I'm waiting for some numbers from engineer Bob. Okay, now we can clear that up. That doesn't have to muddy up a briefing meeting or a status meeting. We can take care of that with a couple phone calls. So that's what I really love about this. And then anything that gets submitted for review, because these workflows are customizable, so you can set them up for whatever authority you need to approve the different milestones. You also have the ability to kind of track this whole ideation workflow. So I can go from raw ideas to ideas that are ready to be promoted into projects, to your active ideas, and then you can get into your completed projects. And I don't have any completed yet, but paused or canceled, you also can get into those. So no longer a mystery as to where any given project is in a CI group.